Hi, folks. We see you all coming in. We're going to wait a couple more minutes to get started, but we wanted to start letting people come into the meeting. We're glad you're all here. Again, we're just letting folks come in. We'll still wait another minute or two to get started, but we are excited to have you all here. Hi, folks. We are glad you're all here. We're going to wait just one more minute to let everyone join. We've got about 30 attendees so far, which is great. I'm going to wait until 10:02 to start to give folks a little bit of a cushion. And if you're just logging in, we're waiting just a couple more minutes to give everybody time to settle in. All right, I'm gonna get us started. We're at 10:02. We've got 45 people here. So welcome everyone to our annual community agency funding program bidders conference. We're excited to have you all here. I'm going to start with just some initial housekeeping items. There is a link in the Q&A. If you look under the answered questions, Emily has shared a link a couple times. I'm going to ask her to paste it one more time because I don't think it shows up and if it was posted before you logged on. Please click that link. That's our sign-in sheet for our bidders conference, which is mandatory. So we want to know that you are here. So please click that. And if you have any issues with it, you can put a question in. I see that we already have a question about the sign-in, which is what does program or event name mean? Whatever you refer to your program that you're applying for funding for, please put that there. So for example, if you are, I'm going to pick on somebody. If you're from Central Community Partners, you would put your entrepreneurship program as the program name. Uh, so please complete that and we'll kind of remind you throughout to make sure that you've done that. Other housekeeping items, there is this Q&A that it looks like somebody's already figured out, which is great. You can put questions in there throughout. We're going to reserve time at the end. We have a lot of content to get through. So if you don't mind, we ask that you hold your questions until the end, but you're welcome to put them in the Q&A. And then at the end, you'll also have the opportunity to raise your hand and ask a question in person with your mouth. And then finally, we are recording this meeting. So just so you're aware of that. And again, the sign-in sheet, if you go to the Q&A, you'll see the link. Carol posted as a question, here's the link to sign in, and then Emily has put the link underneath it. All right, so let's go ahead and move to the next slide, please. All right, so here's our agenda. I haven't introduced myself yet. My name is Amy Cole-Bloom. I'm the Community Services Manager. This is what we're going to do today. You're going to meet the rest of our team. We'll talk through the funding process. We'll talk through eligibility and some important kind of financial considerations. We're using multiple pots of funding for this process. We want you to understand where the money's coming from. We'll talk through the application process and the timeline. We'll talk about who your point of contact is for technical assistance, and then we'll open things up for question and answer at the end. So, introductions. Here's your team. Again, I'm Amy. I'm your Community Services Manager. And you'll hear this again, but I'm the point person for social services and arts and music programs. Carol Lee is here as well. She's a management analyst on our team, and she is the point person for community development block grant, economic development, and infrastructure programs. So economic development and infrastructure, Carol's your girl. So if you were last year emailing me about your programs, you now email Carol. Emily Huang has joined our team. She's a management analyst. She will be your point person for public services. So if you were emailing Carol last year, you are now emailing Emily. And then Rick Rivera is a management analyst, and he is taking the lead on paratransit. And Evelyn Oliveira is our senior secretary. She's not with us this morning, but you will get lots of emails from her setting up contracts, and she is available for our admin support. All right, so here's just a brief summary of our funding process. This is the annual competitive funding process, and when we say competitive, it is highly competitive. We consistently have requests for funding that exceed the amount of money that we have. And so all of this is subject to the availability of our funding. We don't know yet how much community development block grant money we will have. We expect to get that in the spring of next year. We have some different categories for your application. Everyone completes the same common application, but there are different buckets that we look at. There's the infrastructure and economic development, so construction projects, neighborhood facilities projects, and economic development projects. Services, and that gets funded from two different places, community development block grant and general fund, and then arts and music program. We're going to say this a lot today, but here's the first time you're going to hear it. We are not funding special events this year. Last year, we did funding through this process for one-time special events. We heard your feedback and we recognize that this was a really cumbersome process for those one-time events. And so we are not using this process to fund those this year for fiscal year 25. Instead, everyone who received funding for a special event has already received an email from Rick, and you've been told that you have an opportunity to reach out to the city to provide your feedback, and you'll be hearing from our team again in the spring to talk about what the process will look like for special events. But one more time, we are not funding special events through the community agency funding process this year. And then we have our beautiful funding sources there at the bottom, HUD's Community Development Block Grant, funds public services, infrastructure, and economic development, and the city's general fund funds our social services and arts and music. So next, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emily to talk more about the financial side.
Hello, everyone. My name is Emily. Again, I'm management analyst with Community Services Division, and it's nice to see you all here. Some financial considerations that we want you to be aware of is that the minimum grant request is $10,000 for all of the categories except for arts and music. If you are an arts and music agency, you can apply for less than $10,000. Program budgets must balance, and applicants should list all outsourced funding sources. This will be in your CDS application where you'll put your budget balance, and that will also include outside funding sources, as Carol will mention later on in the presentation. For CDBG federally funded activities, you will receive, if you are given funds on a monthly reimbursement basis. And I'll run into that in the next slide. And for general fund activities, which are city funded activities, you'll receive funds at the beginning of the contract execution, so 50% at the beginning. At the mid-year report, we give the extra 30%, and at the end-year report, we give the remaining 20%. Funds for this application process will be distributed between July 2024 and June 2025. So to give you a sense of how the funding frequency is between the CDBG grant and the Services and Arts and Music General Fund projects, for CDBG, that's the monthly reimbursement, as I had mentioned, and that's due within 15 days of the month's end. For reporting frequency, we require quarterly reports just to see how the project's going, and that is due no later than 30 days following the end of the period, with the exception of the end of the year report, which is due no later than July 15th. For general fund activities, like I had mentioned, the funding frequency for that is specifically in the beginning, you get 50%, mid-year, you get 30%, and at the end of the year, you get that remaining 20%. And we only require semi-annual reporting for this, which is due no later than 30 days following the mid-year point, which is January 30th, and no later than 15 days following the end of the year for that end-year report. And now that we kind of discussed the two different funding sources and the frequency of that, we are going to touch on some funding eligibility points. One is that the common application applicants must be a registered 501c nonprofit, and we need proof of that, or a government entity. Additionally, if you are applying for over $20,000, you need to be able to have an independent fiscal audit in the last 12 months. If you are not applying for over $20,000, then you do not need a fiscal sponsor. And if you are applying for over $20,000 and you don't have the ability to get an independent fiscal audit, you need a fiscal sponsor. And Carol will touch on that later. If you don't have the ability to get a fiscal audit and you don't want a fiscal sponsor, you're unable to receive more than $20,000. In addition, you must meet minimum contracting standards, as well as you need to serve low-income Hayward residents, and CDBG applicants must meet a national HUD, national objective. Now I'll pass it over to Carol.
Good morning, folks. I'm sorry. I'm still struggling with finding that unmute button after so many years. But it's very nice for you all to see us this morning. I know it's not reciprocated, but we are here and we're so glad that you've joined. Like Amy mentioned, I am also a part of the community services team, and I will be providing support and technical assistance this year to our CDBG infrastructure and ED applicants, or our economic development applicants. And so I have the pleasure of going over first an overview of our application, and then I'll step back and kind of speak to the overall RFP packet. So we'll start with the application. And then actually, before we go into the the overview, I want to reiterate that materials that we're going over will be available online. So I would suggest that you kind of look at the materials, listen to what we're kind of saying, and if you have questions, jot them down, but you don't have to write down everything on our slides. They will be available. And then equally important, applications must be submitted on our online portal, which is City Data Services. And that's our grant management portal, and they are due December 1st by 5 p.m. No paper or late applications will be considered. So those are two very important things. And now I'll just move on to the different components of the application. So the application this year is formatted very similarly to last year's. We start with the administration and financial information sections. Here we will ask you for your current contact information, including your SAMS number. It is important to provide the contact information for the person on your team that will be responding to city emails. And we know that sometimes it seems most official to put the contact of the ED or the, the executive director, but in a large organization, we really want to be able to communicate with someone who can respond to our emails. We're going to send reminders about due dates. We're going to send important information, and we want to make sure that your agency receives that. Additionally, in these sections, there's a few eligibility requirement questions. Emily walked through some of those requirements, but in this section, you'll need to confirm that either you have a nonprofit status or that you are a government agency, and then also that your agency has completed a fiscal audit within the last 12 months. And I just want to clarify and reiterate that agencies without a current fiscal audit can still apply, but it must be in partnership with the fiscal sponsor, and you cannot exceed $20,000. So in both cases, a fiscal audit is required. One, it could be for your own agency. The other one is in partnership with an agency that can meet those minimum standards on your behalf. And in most cases, the fiscal sponsor will be filling out the application on behalf of a sponsored agency. So there is a question in there for them to identify the organization that's being sponsored. There was a little bit of confusion over this, so I'm happy to go over it again at the end if there's specific questions. Moving on to program description, we'll be asking you to the best of your ability to select the appropriate funding category. And there, I'll list the categories now, but just to be very clear, there's a description in the application, so it's more clear, right, which category you're applying for. There's economic development and infrastructure, and then there's services and arts and music programs. And so, like I said, the definitions are there, but yeah, I'll leave it at that. If you are planning to apply for community development block grant funds, there are some additional questions in the application, and they'll be marked with CDBG applicants only. There's a few new questions specifically for CDBG infrastructure applicants. So we do ask, if you are applying for those funds, that you take a look at that and reach out to me if you have specific questions on those new questions. If you are unsure if CDBG is the correct funding source for you, we ask that you still complete those questions to the extent that you can. We have been asked in the past if an agency can apply to be considered for both pots of funding. And you're welcome to do that. You can indicate that, but staff does reserve the right after reviewing the applications to determine the best fit based on the federal requirements of CDBG. Moving down into the application, we'll have a section there for agency performance. Here, we really want to learn about your organization's mission, how long you've been serving the Hayward community. And again, there'll be a couple CDBG specific questions in this section. For funding and funding sustainability sections, there's a couple things here that we're going to ask related to budget. We do ask for an agency-wide budget, a program budget, and then the total amount being requested from the city. We recognize that there's going to be some agencies where the program budget and your agency budget are one and the same, and that's fine. And then there's also going to be some larger agencies where you have multiple programs, and we're asking for that agency-wide budget in order to assess the financial stability of your organization, and also kind of just to see where the program fits into the budget or to the agency as a whole. At the very end of the application, we will be asking for the proposed program budget for fiscal year 25. In that table, you'll notice multiple columns. One column will be specific to what you're requesting from the city of Hayward. The next column will be your opportunity to show if there are other funding sources that you're leveraging, whether they're committed or planned. And while matching funds are not required to apply, the Community Services Commission, who makes recommendations to council on these funding, they do take into considerations when they do take into consideration when applicants leverage other funds to support their proposed programs and services. Again, there's a couple questions here that will allow applicants to expand their efforts to diversify their funding and to address how the city funds will impact your agency and this program. For new applicants, the application includes a sample budget for your reference, so feel free to look at that, and if you have additional questions, reach out to staff for technical assistance. As we continue down into the application, you'll find some questions related to the city's strategic roadmap and community alignment. Here, we really want to learn how your program aligns with the general city priorities and what the community need is that's being met through your proposed program or service. There's some narrative questions in here. There's a 250-word limit per question. But this portion really gives applicants an opportunity to speak to what gave rise to your program or service and how it addresses an unmet need in Hayward. There's also going to be the impact, performance measures, and goals sections. In these sections, you'll need to identify the service type, and it's going to be a small table, and you'll have the opportunity to identify what % of your services are prevention services and what are responsive services. Essentially, we're looking here to see if your service or program prevents a need or addresses a need, or both. Wrapping up these sections are your performance measures and goals. These are really important, and it's your opportunity to highlight to the commission your planned achievements and what impact will be a result of the funding that you're requesting. Over the last few years, we've also collected racial equity data. And so this should not be new for those who have applied before, but we will first be asking for agency-specific demographics. And this is for your staff and leadership. And this is in alignment with the city's racial equity plan. The Community Services Commission, their role, again, is to prepare that funding recommendation for council's consideration. And so they really want to be able to apply a racial equity lens to this process and this work. And they want to better understand the demographics of the agencies that are applying for funding. Below that section, there's going to be some questions or like a chart for client demographics. And that's really for who your program or services served last fiscal year. Again, this is also the request of our Community Service Commission, and this is to understand the populations that are being served by this funding. Lastly, there's a new section, and we want to make sure that this is clear that it's available. This is, I think it's headed interview logistics. And this is the city wanting to ensure that all applicants are aware that interpretation services are available upon request. And staff can coordinate that for your agency if that's required. And this is probably going to be most helpful during the interview process. And so in January, we hold 2 Saturdays where we have our application review committees interview each applicant, and sometimes interpretation services are needed. This is your opportunity to let us know that we can help coordinate that for you. Thank you, Emily. In this next slide, I'm going to actually step back and talk about the RFP packet. The application is part of the packet, but also included in that packet is our funding process calendar. This is important so you and your staff can kind of plan ahead. We make this calendar in the summer, and we kind of know these dates well in advance. So if you could look forward and make sure the appropriate staff person is available in January for the interview. If you'd like to attend the CSC meetings in February and March, those are listed. And then council will host both a work session and a public hearing in April. Those dates are provided as well, so you can make arrangements if you'd like to attend. We provide an overview of the funding process here. We spell out the contracting and reporting standards. This is very important because in the past we have had some incidents of folks going through this whole process, right? 9 months of applying for funds, council awards funding, and then when it comes time to contracting, they realize they can't meet the minimum requirements. And so if you could take a look there, ask questions, reach out to staff if you have those. We would like to address those upfront instead of having you do this whole process and not be able to access those funds. I just went over the application overview, but you'll have a blank application here. Just want to reiterate, this is for reference only. You can certainly circulate it around with staff to kind of get buy-in or check that you have those 250 word limits down, but all of the applications will need to be submitted through City Data Services online. After that, we provide the FY23 income limit summary provided by HUD, as well as a low income census tract map for your reference. We do provide a program budget sample, which will have the different columns for what the ask is and revenue sources. And then additionally, we'll provide a scoring rubric, which was implemented last year. It really helps streamline the scoring when the Community Services Commission reviews all the applications. This is an objective way and a way that you can know upfront what we're looking for. Lastly, there's a glossary of frequently used terms. So if you could review that or reference that if there's something confusing. And I just want to close by saying this was a lot of information. And if you have questions, we'll have time at the end to address them. And then you can reach out to staff where our contacts will be available later as well. I'll turn it over now to Rick to continue the presentation.
Well, good morning, everyone. Again, wanted to thank you for joining us. I'm Rick Rivera. I am going to be your primary contact for any paratransit questions, and I will be discussing basically your application submission process and giving another overview of the timeline. So covering a little bit of what Carol mentioned in more detail. Our application deadline is going to be Friday, December 1st at 5 p.m. You will need to get your application completed and submitted into City Data Services by 5 p.m. We will not be considering any late applications. The application materials are all already available on City Data Services for you to look at. That includes the request for proposal as well as the entire application. City Data Services is our online service portal for community agency funded programs. And so if you've heard us refer to City Data Services or CDS, that's actually what we're talking about. And it is at www.citydataservices.net. In order to log in, if you are a returning applicant, you're going to want to use your password and ID from last year. Since you're only using this once a year, if you don't remember what that was, please reach out to your appropriate staff member and we will walk you through getting logged in. Now, if you're a new applicant, what you're going to need to do is use HAY2024, that's HAY 2024, as both your login ID and your password. And at that point, you will be issued a unique login and password once you get into the system. And again, to reiterate what Carol said, even though the RFP will include a Word format version of the application, that is just so you can look through it and practice, but please, please, please make sure that you are actually filling out the application through the City Data Services app. Moving on, just to give an overview of the timeline. As I said, the applications are going to be due on Friday, December 1st. The first thing that's going to happen once we get to that deadline is that we're going to be looking through your applications to make sure that they're complete, to make sure that you are an eligible agency. If anything looks incomplete or if staff has any questions about anything, that's when we will be reaching out to you to get clarification, to make sure that everything is ready to go for when we pass the applications onto the Community Services Committee for their review. You'll often hear us refer to them as the CSC as well. They will be reviewing throughout the months, throughout late December and early to mid-January. And so on January 20th and January 27th, so that's 2 successive Saturdays, we will be having our interviews for the agencies with members of the Community Services Committee. And we will let you know what day you're assigned to, but it would probably be a good idea, if possible, to set that time aside now already with your staff. so that they can be available. Generally find that the most successful interviews are those where agencies bring uh, their most knowledgeable staff members on the individual program. So that's why we ask you, go ahead and start making plans for that ahead of time so that we can be ready in January. After the committee interviews, we would be sending the funding recommendations from the Community Services Committee to the City Council. And they will be reviewing that. We will have a public comment period as well on those recommendations. And finally, in May 2024, around the time that we do our annual city budget, we will also have council vote on the final funding determinations for all projects. And again, as Carol
Rick,
mentioned,
I'm
yes,
so sorry to jump in. I just caught that that was a typo. It is April of 2024. So I've changed it on this slide, and I wanted just to call it out that those final funding determinations will happen at council in April. So a whole month earlier.
thanks, Amy. Thank you for catching that typo. But still, it's going to be as part of our budgeting process. And, as Carol mentioned, there is going to be a rubric that the Community Services Committee will be using in their evaluations in January. Finally, just to give a recap of who to contact if you have questions. As you already heard from Carol, Carol will be your primary contact for CDBG economic development, infrastructure, and facilities. Emily Huang will be your primary contact for CDBG public services. I will be the contact for any paratransit programs. And just as a reminder, for those of you who were here last year, when I was the contact for special events, we are not doing special events through this process. As Amy mentioned, we have heard your feedback and we are trying to develop a process that is a little less cumbersome for those one-time events. Finally, for any social services and arts and music questions for general funded agencies, you'll want to reach out to Amy Cole Bloom. Now, if you aren't sure which category your project falls under, please refer to the definitions that Carol mentioned that are going to be in the RFP. And with that, I will pass it back to Amy to close us out.
Yes, thank you. Okay. So I know that was a lot of information. We have a whole half hour reserved to address questions. I do want to say one more time, if you haven't already, please sign in on the attendance sheet. I'm going to ask Emily to post it one more time. We understand that if we post an answer to the Q&A before you log on, that you don't see it. So that's why we're posting it so many times for the folks who logged on a little bit later. So you'll see there's here's the link to sign in question from Carol. And then for those of you who've been on since the beginning, you'll see lots of posts with the link. But that is where that survey123.arcgis, that's the link we'd like you to go to submit that we know you were here. So we've had some questions come in through the Q&A. And so what we're going to do is answer the ones that were type submitted live. But I'm going to go in the order that we received them. So the first question we received is that HUD allows for-profit organizations to provide special economic development services. And the question is, did Hayward Council pass a resolution that does not allow for-profit agencies to participate in this funding allocation? There is no resolution from council that says that specifically. Council has given guidance for this process that they want to see this funding, both CDBG and general fund, prioritized for nonprofit agencies. So that is our default, is to fund nonprofits. You are correct that HUD does allow for special economic development activities to go to for-profit organizations. You can also be a CBDO as well, a community-based development organization, and receive funds. Typically, for for-profit businesses to receive assistance, they go through our economic development division. And sometimes that is CDBG money, and other times it is other sources of funding. So I think the same person who asked that question, Catherine Fuentes, has also asked to meet virtually with our team. Absolutely. Catherine, please send an email to Carol and we'd be happy to talk this through more specifically with you. The next question is, when will the application be available on the Hayward NOFA website? The RFP packet will be posted on that website by the end of today, but I believe it is already available on City Data Services. So if you're feeling ready to go today and don't want to wait for that link to show up online, you're welcome to go to citydataservices.net and you will see the application there. Another question is, will we be able to receive this PowerPoint? This PowerPoint will be posted to the website as well. So you have all the resources that we are sharing here will be posted on that website. Let's see, what is the allowable, wait, did I skip one? Let me make sure. Okay, what is the allowable indirect administrative overhead cost rate? We typically will do a 10% indirect, but we don't cap other admin expenses, if that makes sense. So we do cap the indirect, but if you are doing salaries, there is no cap on the number of staff salaries or whatever that you may charge using this funding. I will say that some of our commissioners like to see funding going directly to program expenses. We have done some education with them as much as we can that a lot of the work of the program is done by staff. And so that is why we don't cap, we don't do like a 15% admin cap for this funding. So I hope that that's clear. I'll say it one more time, 10% on indirect, but no other general cap on administrative costs. Let's see. What annual income qualifies as low income in Hayward? I'm not going to make you sit while I Google this to find the answer, but it is part, I believe, I'm looking at my team, and it's part of the RFP packet. We use the HUD determination. So if I were to Google right now and tell you what I would search is HUD user AMI. AMI stands for area median income. And when you do that search, you get HUD's page and you click on the most recent fiscal year. I believe they have fiscal year 23 still. I don't know if they've gotten, do they have 24 yet? I don't think they do because they're on a different fiscal year than us. So fiscal 23 is what's most recent there. You click that link, you specify your state as California, you click Alameda County, and that'll give you the table based on household size for area median income.
Can I jump in really
Yeah,
quick?
please.
So the easiest way to access the RFP packet right now is to start that application on CDS. And so again, the password for that is HAY capital 2024. And then you'll use that for your ID and your password if you are new to applying with us. If you're applying again as a repeat agency, you'll use your same login. But the easiest way to access that RFP packet is by starting your application, and the RFP packet will be on the application page. And information about income will be in the RFP packet. We include all of that.
Thanks for that addition, Emily. Or you can do the complicated Google search I just described verbally. There's a question, is the cap for arts and music agencies to apply for 20,000 without a fiscal sponsor, or it has to be less? I'm going to go ahead and let Carol answer this one. She is our cap expert.
Happy to take this one. So I just want to clearly state it, and if I need to say it another way, I'm happy to do that. But an agency may partner with a sponsor agency and apply for up to $20,000. And that is if an agency cannot produce their own fiscal audit. And so that can be true. Historically, it's really been our arts and music applicants that have chosen to have a fiscal sponsor to help meet that audit requirement, but it's not necessarily limited to. But if an agency requires to partner with a fiscal sponsor, they may not apply for more than $20,000.
Thank you, Carol. All right, I'm going down the list. Again, these are questions that were submitted in the Q&A. For the audited financials, can we submit it later than December 1st deadline? We're in the process of our audit in case it doesn't get finished by December 1st. Yes, so you can let your technical assistant staff contact know if you're still in the process of completing the most recent audit, and we recommend submitting the most recent previously completed audit. And we will make sure to convey that to the commissioners when they make their review. But we need to see your most, so if it's not for the most recent fiscal year, then certainly for the fiscal year before, and with a note that you're working on that audit. We recognize that happens a lot with the timing of this for folks. Ooh, good question. Does the sign-in sheet send a confirmation email or receipt? I don't think so. No. If you're concerned, let us know. You can email us and that you were here. Because the person who submitted that was anonymous, so I can't confirm. Our organization's annual meeting is scheduled for January 20th. Is there flexibility with the interview schedule timing? Only a little. The community services commissioners conduct their interviews based on category. So I don't think we have it confirmed yet, but we'll let you know what the dates are for each category. I can tell you right now, if you are a services applicant, it will be both of the Saturdays. So if you fall into that category, let us know ASAP and we can take that into consideration with scheduling. If you're applying for one of the other categories, infrastructure and economic development or arts and music, those will be designated on a specific day, one of those 2 Saturdays, which we'll confirm soon. And for that, email us ASAP and we'll be able to have some flexibility within that day, but we won't be able to move you to a different day because for both of those categories, they do all the interviews and make their deliberations and decisions on that day. What is the deadline for submissions? December 1st at 5 p.m. online via City Data Services. No paper applications will be accepted and no applications will be accepted after 5 p.m. on Friday, December 1st. Can you apply for up to $20,000 without a fiscal audit? Your agency does not have to have a fiscal audit if you're applying for under $20,000. However, you need a fiscal sponsor who does have a fiscal audit. So if your agency does not have an audit, you're welcome to apply for up to $20K in partnership with a fiscal sponsor that does have an audit. Carol, did I do it wrong?
No, I just want to mention that there is additional information on this piece in the actual application in RFP. The fiscal sponsor is eligible for up to 10% of the award to be a fiscal sponsor because they will be doing a lot of administrative tasks on behalf of the sponsored agency. So you could apply up to 20,000 in partnership with the fiscal sponsor, but your agency's actual direct grant may be slightly less than that, right? 90% of it.
And there was a follow-up question on that. Does it mean either way a fiscal sponsor is required for arts and music if we do not have our own independent audit? Yes. If you don't have, and it doesn't matter, I understand that these questions are coming specifically from arts and music applicants, but I want to be clear, this is for everybody. Does not matter what category you're applying for. That again, either way, a fiscal sponsor is required. That's the question. If you don't have your own audit, you need a fiscal sponsor that has that audit. Related, we have another question that came in asking about if your application is judged by the experience of your fiscal sponsor or by you. The fiscal sponsor's only job is to serve as a proxy for that financial audit to signal to us that there is an agency involved that has the capacity to manage these funds and deal with all the invoicing and that sort of reporting. Everything else about your application will be judged based on you, not your fiscal sponsor. So the rubric, the scoring rubric that's in the RFP packet will be completed based on your agency and your application, not your fiscal sponsor. Is there an audit letter or something similar that can be used for smaller grant requests in place of the full audit? Unfortunately, I'm looking at Carol and Rick because they did a lot of research on this, trying to find an alternative. And we were not able to find a suitable alternative that was going to be cost effective for you all. It was still going to be expensive to get a letter that would satisfy the requirements that an audit would otherwise satisfy. And I think they reached out to CPAs and firms, and like very, very few firms are even doing that work. So it still would be expensive and it's hard to find someone to do it. So the answer there is no, there is not something that can replace the audit. Carol, go ahead.
And I just wanted to add one more piece. I'll give credit to Rick, actually. He did the extensive research, but we worked together on this program. And I just wanted to mention that the year prior, the CSC and council increased the threshold from 15,000 to 20,000 to try to make to allow for more funding to go directly to agencies who could not meet this requirement. So we did hear that. We did try to make some adjustments, but unfortunately, like Amy said, the work behind providing even a smaller audit or checking to make sure that a nonprofit were kind of meeting what the city was requiring was so much work that it wouldn't be very cost effective. So just wanted to provide a little context there that instead of the 15,000 cap, I think 2 years ago, council increased it to 20,000. So that helps a little bit. Obviously doesn't fully address the question, but wanted to add that.
Carol, related to that, would you mind also following up on Carol's question in the Q&A based on prior year requirements?
So I can't exactly speak to when the requirement was that there wasn't a requirement for a fiscal sponsor or an audit for agencies that applied for under $10,000. But I can tell you right now, it is different from that. The requirement is that if you don't have a fiscal audit, you can apply up to $20,000, but in partnership with an agency that can meet that requirement. So if it was like this in the past, things have definitely changed. I know since the 10,000 cap, it went to 15, now it's 20. And we just want to clarify because there was some confusion last year, and we also heard back that it's getting more challenging for some of the smaller nonprofits to get a fiscal audit. And this is why we're trying to increase the amount that can be requested in partnership with a fiscal sponsor.
Thanks, Carol. I'm just going through, there's a question about posting the Q&A so we will know how questions were answered. So we're trying to answer these live as we go. We'll post the report. Will we post the recording of this? I think we'll post the recording of this as well. So those questions are answered live on the recording.
Yes, and we'll also have a Q&A log of all of the questions that are being asked. So we'll be able to have that available.
Yes, thank you, Emily.
And Amy, I saw a question that was related, but it was marked answered live. And I just want to make sure that I specifically answer that. It said last year, applicants were able to apply for up to 20 without a fiscal sponsor. Was that changed this year? And if you look at the application, the wording is identical, but I think it was interpreted, or maybe we weren't clear enough during the bidders conference, which is why we want to be very clear this time. And we did work with some agencies this last year to ensure that we were maintaining relationships with them and making sure that we were also being fiscally responsible, but there was no change. I think it was just interpreted differently and we weren't as explicit when we were giving this guidance. So we want to just make sure to be clear that the requirements did not change, but we want to make sure that everybody is on the same page with what that means.
Thank you, Carol. Again, related to fiscal sponsor, there's a question, does the fiscal sponsor apply for funding? Yes, they will submit the application on your behalf, but you will be expected to complete the application in collaboration with them. Does the city have a list of potential fiscal sponsors? That is something that we can pull together, yes, and we will post that on the site. Are we able to apply for 2 categories? For example, both infrastructure, economic development, and services, or should we apply for 1 category only? There is no limit to the number of categories that you can apply for. So you can apply in multiple categories. Is the application available now on CDS? I'm not seeing anything when I click, I want to complete the COH Common App for fiscal 24-25. Interesting. We'll come back to that question. I'm going to ask Emily to poke around while we answer some other questions.
I think my main follow-up with that is it a agency that had applied for it prior? Because if you're a new person, I do see that you can like put in the login and password and apply, but just want to confirm if
the person who asked it is anonymous, so I don't know. If you wouldn't mind maybe following up with who you are, we won't publish that question, but we will answer the one that you submitted anonymously. Okay, let's see. I'm going to actually ask someone on my team because I don't know the answer to this one off the top of my head of when you use a fiscal sponsor, is the check made out to them and they manage the invoice? I believe that's true. Carol, you jump in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. So the reimbursements, well, let me back up. They will apply on behalf of the sponsored agency, but they will kind of note which agency and program they're applying for. In City Data Services, typically it'll be under their account, but the program oftentimes has the agency that is sponsored and their program as well. They will be requesting reimbursement from the city. The city will issue payment to the fiscal sponsor, and then the fiscal sponsor typically then kind of does a pass through and provides funding directly to the agency that's sponsored.
Let's see. I'm just going through to make sure. Is there a cap to the amount of funds we can request? So broadly speaking, there is not a cap aside from what we're talking about with the fiscal sponsorship and having an audit. So if you don't have an audit, you must 1, get a fiscal sponsor with one, and 2, you can only apply for up to 20K. Beyond that, there are no caps on how much you ask for. I will say, I think we had it on a slide that for our services programs, the average award is not large. It ranges probably from 20 to 45,000, somewhere around there. Economic development, because there's a cap from HUD on how much we can spend of our CDBG money. And then we have a limited pool of general fund money. For the economic development and infrastructure awards, those on average tend to be higher. I think our range there is between 50 and then a little over $200,000, depending on the activity. But there is not a cap. Those are just kind of the ranges. I want folks to understand that we are consistently oversubscribed on these funds. And so coming in with a $1 million request, we're not telling you not to do that, but we want you to have realistic expectations. We are only looking at probably $900,000 in the ED and infrastructure bucket, and then about $250,000 in the public services CDBG bucket. So there's only a limited number of funds. Let's see. So there is a question about, can a board member who's a tax preparer do an audit for us? I'm gonna let Rick answer that one. Rick, do you mind?
Uh, yes, I'm unmuting to be the bearer of bad news on this, I'm afraid. But um, unfortunately, typically an audit by definition is meant to be done by an independent outside evaluator. And so we would still need to have a fiscal sponsor in that regard. And, just like Carol said earlier, we recognize that it can be very, very expensive to get an audit for a smaller organization. And we did look into those lower cost options, including having, um, a provision of internal financial documents, and that was deemed insufficient, unfortunately. So thanks, Amy, for having me give the bad news.
You're welcome. Thanks, Rick. I Let's see. I'm going through the questions. I see we still have the one about applying for 2 categories. So I'm just going to say that one more time, that yes, you can apply for multiple categories at once.
Amy,
And
can I
yeah,
clarify? You can
please.
apply for 2 categories, but they will be separate applications. If it's a separate project or service, they will need to be on 2 different applications.
Yes. Thank you, Carol. That is really important. So you can submit multiple applications and then you will have multiple interviews as well. We try and stack agencies so that you're doing like one long block and you're not logging on at 9 a.m. and then again at 2 p.m. But you will do separate interviews for multiple applications too. A question, can someone apply for over 20K with a fiscal sponsor and not have an audit? If you are working with a fiscal sponsor, the cap of an award is $20,000. Can we recommend where to get a fiscal audit? I am looking at Carol and Rick. Do you have a record of when we were doing that research? Are there any like accounting firms that we can recommend?
Unfortunately, the city can't
Yeah.
actually provide a list because it would violate preference. Like we can't provide a list because it would imply that there's a preference of hiring any particular agency or organization. If you Google it, that's kind of where staff usually starts too. There's a list, and I think amongst the people who are on this call or in the community, I would start there. But the city cannot provide a list to recommend or suggest somebody to provide a fiscal audit.
Thank you. And the second part of that question is what year it needs to be completed for. We go based on fiscal years. So it would be the last fiscal year, which would be July 1 of 2022 through June 30th of 2023. If your agency is operating on a calendar year, we would accept your calendar year 2022 audit. Does the fiscal sponsor do the logging in on city data services? Yes. So that what it will look like on city data services is the agency name will be your fiscal sponsor, and then the program name will typically be your program and have your agency's name in it, and that helps us track that. I see a follow-up comment from Ms. Evans that I'm not going to have us publish. Or we can, I think, Emily, it looks like you started, that you had an experience where the fiscal sponsor didn't provide the funds to your nonprofit. That's the first that I'm hearing about that experience, and I'm deeply sorry that if that happened or that happened. Please reach out to our team, to your technical assistance point person, so we can hear more about that and see what we can do to support, and then make sure that that's not something that happens ever again. What is the total funding for the arts and music agencies? Carol, thank you. Like it's 80, but I don't want to get it wrong, but it's not 80.
It was recently increased. It's $132,000 for arts and music programming, and there's a separate allocation and a separate process for special events.
Thank you. And the last question we have on here is, will the interview be remote or in person? They will be remote. You'll be given, it's all done through Teams. So if you have never used Microsoft Teams before, that is a great thing to reach out to your technical assistant staff contact for support there. We love to make sure that you've got everything you need to log on to a Teams meeting before interview day. We know that not everybody is using Microsoft Teams. Most folks are comfortable with Zoom. So we want to make sure that you're ready to go and don't have any technical issues on day of. So just want to put that offer out there that is another thing we can do to help support you in advance of the interviews, is give you that practice. It is 10:58. Oh, sorry, go
I
ahead.
just want to add one quick note. The interviews seem a little daunting, but typically they're 15 minutes where you kind of put your best foot forward and, shine and do your interview, but it's definitely not going to be a super long process. There's typically over 50 interviews crammed into 2 days. And so that's just a little bit of context when you're planning for that.
Also, the community services commissioners will review your application in advance, and they will submit questions to staff beforehand, and we will then get those questions to you. So in theory, you will have seen the questions that they're, aside from kind of their general interview questions, but any like specific questions about your program where they want to know more, we will send those to you in advance so that you're not surprised come interview day. And there's one more question that said thank you, which thank you. I appreciate that. Any other questions? I'm going to say it one more time. Please sign in if you haven't. We really want to make sure we know everybody who is here, give you credit for attending. And I think we can, it is 11 o'clock, so we can say thank you. Thank you, Lawrence. I hope everybody has a great Wednesday, and we'll be in touch. Thanks for your time.